Right, good morning, everybody. Live recording has started, so I'd like to welcome you to the meeting. Before I start the business of this meeting, I will go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. It is a legal requirement for me to do so. If you can, please have your video on that so that you can be seen by those in attendance and the public watching. Please advise me at once if at any time during the meeting you experience any technical difficulties that prevent you from hearing or being heard. I remind members of the committee that you will only be able to vote on the application before the committee if you've been present for the whole of the presentation of and discussion on the application. I will now call each councillor name in turn. Please speak to confirm that you are able to hear me, and I will confirm in response that I can hear you. Councillor Paul Andrews.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning all. Yes, I can hear and see you clearly.
Good morning, I can see and hear you. Councillor Polly Andrews.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I can hear and see you.
Good morning, I can see and hear you. Councillor Bowen.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I can see and hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. Councillor Fagan.
Good morning, I can see and hear you.
Good morning, I can see and hear you. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear you.
I can also see and hear you. Thank you. Councillor James, giving his apologies. Councillor Johnson, please.
Morning, Chairman. I can see and hear you clearly.
Good morning, I can see and hear you. Councillor Mike Jones.
Yep. Good morning, Chairman. I can see and hear you.
I can also see and hear you. Councillor Milne.
Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you perfectly.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. Councillor Rowan.
Morning, Chair. Morning, colleagues. I can see and hear you clearly, Chair.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. Councillor Shaw.
Good morning, Chair. I can hear and see you.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. Councillor Selden.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you clearly.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. Councillor Stone.
Good morning, Chairman. I can see and hear you clearly.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. And Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Chair. I can hear and see you. Thanks.
Good morning, I can also see and hear you. I'd now like to invite Mr. Withers to introduce the officers that will be dealing with the applications this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. Yes, my name is Simon Withers. I'm the Development Manager and I'll be providing advice on planning matters for the committee this morning. And if I can introduce the officers present, we have Tim Brown and Jenny Priest from the Democratic Services team who'll be providing technical and administrative support. We have Anne Gerson, one of the council's lawyers, who'll be providing advice on legal and constitutional matters as necessary. And presenting the planning applications on the agenda this morning, may I introduce Alistair Wager, who will be dealing with the first two applications at Withington and Dindor, and Josh Bailey, who will be presenting to the third item, Bromyard. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. I'd like to welcome everybody this morning to the meeting. The council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the council's YouTube channel and making an official recording. Please remember what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Please ensure that all mobile devices are switched off to prevent any interference with the audio and video systems. Members are reminded that speeches are limited to 3 minutes. The agenda then. Apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Graham Andrews, Councillor Graham Jones, Councillor Milmore and Councillor James. Item 2, name substitutes. Councillor Bowen is substituting for Councillor Graham Andrews. Councillor Mike Jones is substituting for Councillor Graham Jones, and Councillor Shaw will be substituting for Councillor Milmore. We haven't a substitute for Councillor James. Item 3, declarations of interest. I'll go to each member to ask if they have any items they need to declare on. I will start the ball rolling. With regards to the first item that will be on the agenda, the Withington application, I would like to declare that I know the applicant, but I also know some of the objectors, and this is a non-pecuniary interest. Have we any other members that need to declare? Councillor Selden.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The item 8 is Linton Lane in Bromyard, which used to be part of the old Bromyard ward pre-2015. So I am very familiar with a lot of the residents in that area, but I'll declare it as a non-pecuniary interest, and none of them are personal friends.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Polly Andrews, please. You're muted, Councillor.
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
I know some of the couple of the objectors, although I have to the application at Withington.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, but I haven't. They're not close friends, but I haven't met them for some years. But I do know them. I used to work with Mr. Bainbridge.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Yes, Chair. I will be speaking as the ward councillor on agenda item 8, and therefore will not be taking part in the decision making of the committee on that item.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Right, we move on then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of March 2021. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. So can I ask Democratic Services whether the electronic voting system is ready, and to confirm the number of eligible voting committee members for this poll? Anybody that wasn't present at that meeting obviously can abstain from the voting.
Yes, Chair, it's ready. We have 14 voting members and they should be able to vote now.
Okay, thank you.
All the votes are in, Chair. We have 11 for and 3 against.
3 abstentions, I think that would be.
Yes, sorry, abstentions, Chair. I apologise. 11 for and 3 abstentions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, we move on then to Chairman's announcements. Because the local ward member for agenda item 7 needs to leave to attend a planning hearing, I have agreed to consider agenda item 7, land adjoining Duke Street, Withington first, followed by agenda item 6, land at Hillview Dinder, and then concluding with the agenda item number 8, the Tower Lodge, Linton Lane, Bromyard. Just for members to be aware of that. On behalf of the planning committee members, I would just like to thank Mr. Wager for his work at this council. As members will be aware, Mr. Wager is leaving us towards the beginning of next month. So this will be his last planning committee. He's going to join the Ministry of Housing, and I think we would like to thank him very much for all the work that he has done during his time with Herefordshire Council, and wish him well with his new venture. Okay, all the best. Right, we move on then to item 6, the first application that we will deal with this morning, which is application 204274, land adjoining Duke Street, Withington. Can I request that the public speaker, Mr. Smith, is admitted to the meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to hear Mr. Smith. We'll just wait for the connection to start. Right, now I'm going to ask Mr. Smith if he can hear me, and we'll give it a try to see if we can hear him. You're currently muted, Mr. Smith, so if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted, I think. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, so success, so that's good.
Right.
So if you'd like to mute yourself currently, and we'll move on then. So the first application, as I've just stated, is land adjoining Duke Street, Withington, which is proposed improvements to field access and construction of the farm track. Councillor Paul Andrews is the local ward councillor for this application. He obviously stands aside as a member of this committee and is given the opportunity to open and close the debate. He will not get a vote on this application. So the officer presenting this application this morning is Alistair Wager. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor to Mr. Wager. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. This presentation relates to land at Duke Street, Withington, and is for proposed improvements to the existing field access and construction of an agricultural track. The application site is indicated with a star on the map shown. The development plan for the area is formed of both the Herefordshire Local Plan Core Strategy and the Withington Group Neighbourhood Development Plan. The National Planning Policy Framework is also significant material consideration. Next slide, please. This slide shows an aerial image of the site and its context. The application site is accessed off the classified public highway on the outside of the bend. The linear form of dwellings, which constitutes Duke Street, may be seen to the left of the slide, with the village school being found in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. Further, Stonehouse Farm may be found in the top right-hand corner. The image is annotated with the application site edged in red at the centre of the slide, a public right-of-way being denoted in dashed pink line. The local green space is identified in the NDP, being hatched in green and labelled. Further, the Withington Conservation Area is denoted in light blue and covers much of the right-hand portion of the slide, including the application site. Next slide, please. This slide includes two site photos looking at the existing access and gate. The bottom right photo shows a wider view looking across the public highway to the northeast, showing the existing field gate and the adjacent residential dwelling. The top left photo shows the close-up photo of the existing gate with a stile to the right and the agricultural field below, which forms part of the conservation area as previously referenced. Next slide, please. This slide includes two site photos looking from the agricultural field towards the existing field gate. The top left photo shows a view looking west towards Duke Street, with the gate being shown to the left hand side of the image. The bottom right photo shows a view looking broadly southwest, with the field gate being shown in the right of the image. The ruts in the field show the rough line of the proposed track. Next slide, please. This slide shows a plan view of the existing arrangements on the site, with the existing 3.6 metre wide field gate being denoted. Members may note the hatched area at the top of the slide, showing the agricultural tract that has previously been approved by the Planning Authority under permitted development rights, as referenced at paragraph 3.1 of the officer report. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed proposed arrangements and agricultural track. As may be seen, the existing gate will be repositioned some 10 metres back from the carriageway edge, and the agricultural track formed for approximately 30 metres to connect to the existing approved agricultural track, which leads to Stonehouse Farm. The existing style will remain in place, with visibility displays of 50 metres being maintained in either direction from the existing access, and with the first portion of the track being made up of a bound material. The Council's highways engineer has reviewed the proposal and concludes that there would be no harm in highway terms arising from the proposed development, as is set out at paragraph 6.6 of the officer report. The application site is noted to lie within the Withington Conservation Area. The council has a statutory duty under section 72 of the Planning Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990 to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the area, with case law confirming that change per se isn't unacceptable, with development which leaves the character or appearance unharmed, meeting this statutory test. This is reflected in the development plan policies for the area, including policy LD4 of the core strategy and policy P7 of the NDP. Officers do not consider the proposal to give rise to harm from a heritage standpoint, as the character of the area would remain unchanged due to the continuance of the agricultural use. And whilst there is an element of change to the appearance of the area, this is not considered to be harmful in this instance. Penultimately, the site is identified as local green space in the Withington Neighbourhood Development Plan, with policy P5 seeking to protect identified areas from development which would detract from the character, appearance, and function of the locale. Officers consider the proposal to preserve these aspects of the local green space. To conclude, the development plan carries a statutory presumption in its favour, and the proposal is considered to accord with the policies of the development plan, and officers recommend the application for approval accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wager. Right, we have 3 speakers this morning on this application. The first, Withington Group Parish Council, they have submitted a written statement which I will ask Mr. Brown to read now, please.
The Parish Council would like to object to the application on the following grounds. The increased use of the field access would endanger vehicular and pedestrian safety on this residential section of Duke Street up to Sharp Bend, where there is no pavement. The pedestrian entrance to Withington Primary School is just to the south. Crucially, there is no pavement on this side of the road leading to the school steps. Please note the initial highways objection to a previous application, 190884, which used the same access point. It says, the access would utilise an existing field gate. However, forward visibility around the bend for vehicles travelling from the south and turning right into the access is very poor. We have quoted this previous highways comment to emphasise that the bend is the just same hazard as before. It will be very dangerous turning into the field gateway in any type of vehicle. The highways comment to this present application is therefore very questionable, but the officers have not responded to this anomaly, either to the Parish Council or in their report to committee. It should be noted that the field has another access on Lock Road, along with the main farm access. Lock Road is less residential, quieter, and not on a bus route. At the primary school entrance, there are staff and parent car parks. There is no record of incidents at the school with any farm vehicles. Stonehouse Farm can in fact operate without this field access onto Duke Street. Finally, Duke Street is used by walkers, dog owners, and cyclists as a circular route in the village. We're grateful to Councillor Andrews for pushing for a site visit so that you could fully appreciate the narrowness of the road up to the Sharp Bend, where there is often hold-ups requiring backup of vehicles. There are no passing places. We respectfully ask you to refuse this application on safety grounds. The increase in traffic raises the risk of accidents to pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicular users of this busy village road. And that concludes, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We now have a written representation that's been submitted in objection by the residents of Duke Street. And again, I will ask Mr. Brown if he could read that out, please.
Okay. The officer's report states at paragraph 6.12 that the function of the access would remain unchanged. This is not correct, as the applicant clearly states that it is a new replacement farm access to replace those on Lock Road. As a main access to what could become a major farm operation, a full traffic impact assessment is required. The highway engineer has previously stated that the forward visibility around the bend for vehicles travelling from the south and turning right into the access is very poor, application 190884. He recommended that, without changes to the junction involving highway widening, the application should be refused. The application description of this new farm access, as proposed by the applicant in the supporting documents, is unclear. The existing access only serves the field, which also has another access onto Lock Road. In 2019, in the applicant's submission for an earlier appeal, An aerial photograph showed no track. The current muddy track was only created on Tuesday, 19 January 2021. It is unclear as to why earlier photographs are not included in the officer's report. There was a previous request as to whether prior approval for a farm track was required, application 190793. This track has not been implemented, therefore any access linking up to the farm buildings should be included in the application, as the whole route will connect to the highway. Finally, the report fails to refer to the proposed traffic calming measures being prepared by Balfour Beatty for the Herefordshire Council. These include improved pedestrian safety measures just 40 metres to the south of the bend at the main pedestrian access to Withington School. Pedestrian safety will be at greater risk with this change from field to farm access onto a blind bend of a narrow road with no pavements. Contrary to applicant's statement in the supporting document, Duke Street is residential on a bus route with more vehicle, cycle and pedestrian usage than Lock Road. All the above points have been made to the planning officer, but no responses have been received or included in the committee report. The residents of Duke Street, supported by many other objectors, respectfully request that the application be refused on highway safety grounds. And that concludes, Chairman.
Thank you again, Mr. Brown. I'd now like to invite Mr. Smith, the applicant's agent, to speak. Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes in your own time. Thank you.
Chairman, you can hear me, yes? Excellent. Okay, good morning. Chairman, members of committee. My name is Paul Smith and I speak in support of the application. I don't intend to rehearse the details of the site or the local roads, as members will be fully aware of them by now. Rather, I wish to point out two, may I say, misconceptions held by objectors. The objectors assume that planning permission is required for the use of this historic agricultural access. It is not. The application only seeks to improve this access to handle more safely farm traffic, and that use of the access will continue and intensify. Secondly, it's been chosen to interpret the reference to this proposal being an alternative access as meaning an existing access will close. This is wrong. This cannot be a scheme for replacement access, as this access already exists. Nowhere in the application is it proposed to close any existing farm access. Now, the applicant is willing to accept a planning condition requiring existing farm accesses onto Lock Road to remain open. Such a condition will be reasonable and in response to concerns on that score. The majority of farm traffic originates from the northwest of the village. This traffic would use this improved access, thus avoiding having to negotiate the sharp road bend, a school entrance, a narrow road junction, and the main school entrance to reach the farm entrance on Lock Road. A minority of farm traffic already originates from the north of the village, which will continue to use the main entrance off Lock Road, thus avoiding school entrances. No farm traffic originates from the main village body to the south. Therefore, the proposal will improve highway safety at the access point, and the local road network, as has been accepted by the officers. Reference has been made to an anomaly in the highway officer's viewpoint. That is incorrect. The highway officer previously on another scheme was dealing with different patterns of movement, traffic movement. And in fact, it ended up with the officer accepting the use of that access subject to a condition. So it would be wrong to imply that the officer has had a complete change of heart. And it's for that reason the conditional permission I ask is granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm very pleased that you could actually address the committee in person rather than having to have your statement read out. But I'd like to thank you for your input and now request that Mr. Smith leave the meeting, and I remind him that he can watch the live stream of this meeting on the council's YouTube channel. So I wish you a good day. Thank you. Right, we now move across to Councillor Paul Andrews, who is the ward member for this item. He is a member of this committee, but as the local ward member for this item, he can speak but will not have a vote. He speaks first and then has the right to end the debate. So over to you, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, all. I'd like to thank all that could make the site visit yesterday, and obviously some that couldn't, which is understandable in the current times we're still in. But hopefully this will get better over time. Also, I'd like to thank Alistair Wager for his time on this application, and I wish him well in his new job. Hopefully I'll speak to him before he leaves. But getting back to this application, as you've heard from the parish council and from local residents, this road is served by a bus route as well, which is 420, the Bromwell bus. That is a pinch point on that bend, and it is a dangerous bend. Now, all I can say is there's 3 to 4 access points to this field, as stated, not just 1 or 2. And I just heard Mr. Smith say we keep the one at Lock Road open. Now, I just can't understand why it needs this access being altered. You know, it's a good enough field access. There is a good access point to the farm from Lock Road. Hopefully you saw the photos that were sent through last night, and that was from a concerned resident as well. Now, with regards to the actual entrance, now there is a pathway there. I think Councillor Milne actually pointed out yesterday, has that pathway, public right of way, been moved from the left to the right, or is this road or this access point is a public right of way actually going to cross? So that needs to be answered if at all possible. Also, regarding the area, where actually, if members who were there yesterday could see, and sort of on the pictures, the road that's in front of some houses on Duke Street is not public highway. That is a private road, and it's maintained obviously by the residents of that. So when vehicles come round that area, or tractors coming in and blocking that, that is actually not allowed. You, strictly speaking, you shouldn't be using it as public right of way. Well, public highway. So that's some of the main points. The other points, I'm concerned about drainage. There's drainage issues on Duke Street. We have flooding from the top part of Duke Street that comes down the road. Obviously, there's no drainage plan on this. Not at all. Obviously, there's a ditch nearby, but there's nothing flowing in there. So the residents have concerns on drainage issues. So water flowing down the field, and actually if there's a track there, a solid track, that takes away the soakage of the field. So that's another problem. But the main concern is safety in that area. There is a school entrance. People use and walk that. It doesn't need extra farm vehicles coming through a track. Now, the track was not there. Unfortunately, there's no photographs, and unfortunately, I didn't have a photograph, but if you look actually on Google, you would see that there was no actual farm track there until obviously January of this year. And that was done, and there was mud put on the road at the same time. So what's it going to be used for eventually? Well, you've got to have a look at that. But there's 20 objectors, 2 actually from Lock Road, that have said they prefer the Lock Road access to be used more compared to a new entrance and moving back. The entrance as it is for farm vehicles just going in and out, the access to the field is good enough. It's been there years. There's a new gate there, as we can see. It's not a disused, but it is not a well used, and it shouldn't be well used. It should be used on Lock Road. So that's all I'm going to say at the moment. And I'd like to say I'll be hoping for a good debate on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews. Right, we have 3 members that have indicated that they want to start the debate. So Councillor Bowen, followed by Councillor Roan, followed by Councillor Foxton, please. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it was a pleasure to be out there, and an interesting site, I think. I must say, I think the other lanes we've seen made what we travelled on down to that particular site rather a good road by comparison. If you'd been to Linton Lane, you would have been very much disturbed by that. The site itself, well, it's an existing gateway. Like access has been there some time, I think, and it would seem if you are going to use that and you wish to have traffic going in and out, and you want to shut gates and such, it's much more sensible to have your traffic able to stand behind the gate and be safe and not on the road at all. And that's why I would think that it's very sensible to have your access put further back, 10 meters or so. That would seem logical and sensible to me. The visibility from the gate itself, where we stood on the actual entrance as it is now, in fact, is on the right side of the bend, and you can see very well both ways. So I don't think that's exactly a problem. I can see there could be some problems from flooding possibly, but then that's very often is the way, and those things can be solved, but I don't think it's a planning consideration as such in this case. And you could possibly say the track, if they're going to be stoning it, it should be a permeable surface they're putting on there and not a hard tarmac surface. It would at least then get any rain that falls would go through and drain into the ground itself. And also, we cannot prejudge what might be happening there. We have to look at the application as it stands. We can't say, oh, there might be a house there or 15 houses just up the road or whatever. We must look at what is there, please. So, in my opinion, this is an improvement. And you're talking about the public footpath. Well, it would seem sensible to have the public footpath starting not right across the gateway, but actually to the side, so you don't have any conflict between people and traffic, whether it's frequent or not. It would seem a sensible place to put your access to your public footpath. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
In fact, I might even go so far as to suggest that we should approve this application.
Is that a proposal then, Mr.
It's a proposal.
Councillor Bowen?
Yes, it is.
Have I a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Rowan. Okay. Before I move to the next speaker, there was a question that was asked actually in Councillor Bowen's address, but also Councillor Paul Andrews mentioned it with regards to the actual footpath and the location of the footpath, as to whether there's been any movement of the stile from one side of the track to the other. I don't know whether we've got any information on that.
I'm happy to comment, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wager.
From reviewing the Google Street View images of the site previously, it looks as if, as viewed from the highway, the stile was previously on the left-hand side of the gate. Now, as you look at the site at the present day, the stile is on the right-hand side of the gate. Having looked at the public rights of way map and the definitive map, the official line is on the right-hand side. So the present arrangements, as I understand it, align with what should be there for the public right of way, and the stile isn't to be moved as part of this application. So I don't see there being any issue in that regard.
Okay, thank you. That's very useful clarification, Mr. Wager. Move to Councillor Rowan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I always emphasise when making my considerations as local member and parish council and locals' opinions, because they're the people who live and breathe the place. But I'm brought back down from that starting point by very much the fact that this is Herefordshire, rural Herefordshire. This is an agricultural entrance to a field with a recommendation of approval. I can't see that this increase in the entrance size can do anything other than make it safer. I mean, if you've got a, I sometimes laugh about agricultural movements, but if you've got a tractor and trailer on that corner and at present it wants to access that field, and I have got a question at the end, it wants to access that field. At the moment, it stops in the highway out jumps the tractor driver, opens the field, drives in, and then closes it. With an increase in entrance area, setting the gate back further, it looks as if the tractor trailer will be able to be off-road, off the highway, which is obviously a much, much safer situation for the driver to get out and open the field, open the gate. And if you think about it the other way, with a 30-meter hard surface for the tractor to drive on as it's leaving, I'm assuming everything is a tractor that goes in and out of a field here, everyone, it would then not carry as much mud onto the road, onto a corner, which obviously is, once again, that can only be safer. I can't really see any big issues as presented. It's a field entrance in rural Herefordshire. Yes, it is in a village, but let's bring it down to basics, everyone. Now, I think that, and I stand corrected, and somebody might want to jump in and stop me here, but is it because of recent planning history, and this is a rhetorical question, is it because of recent planning history that there is so much against moving this entrance or changes to this entrance? Now, if there is, that's nothing for us to think about. We deal with what's in front of us. So I can't see anything other than reasonable, because it is reasonable request, to go with officer recommendation today. But my question is there a difference between a field entrance and a farm entrance? Now, I don't know who's going to answer that, but good luck with that one. But there's plenty of farmers on this committee today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Well, I'll put that question initially to Mr. Wager, and maybe Mr. Withers might back up any comments that Mr. Wager makes.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'm sure Mr. Withers might have something to say. In planning terms, agricultural uses aren't controlled under the planning system, under the definition of development. So in planning terms, I don't see there being a difference between a field gate and the farm access per se as a definition. Obviously, there might be different intensifications for a use which goes directly into the main farm holding and the cluster of buildings. But this proposal's for the field gate. There it's existing, and I think much of the points have been rehearsed. I'll hand over to Mr. Withers to make any further comments.
I don't really have a great deal more that I can add. I mean, essentially that is the point. There is no control over the use of, the intensification of the use of that access, whether it's in its existing form or in the approved form that we're looking at today. It's an agricultural access, whether you describe it as a field access or a farm entrance in planning terms is not relevant. What one has to consider, the impacts of the physical impacts, I suppose, not the use implications, but the physical impacts of what's being proposed in terms of the character of the area, its highway safety implications to a point, but beyond that, we can't speculate about what's gone before, what development might be facilitated, because ultimately that will be tested against relevant policy at that point in time.
Okay, I think that clarifies the situation. I'll move to Councillor Foxton now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, thank you.
That's lovely, thank you. Point of fact, I've had the pleasure of 2 site visits to the field adjoining Duke Street in Withington. The first was prior to the planning meeting on March the 3rd, and the second yesterday. Now, whilst photographs don't lie, a site visit gives the full picture. Whilst initially on paper it looks fairly straightforward, but there are matters to be considered within this application. Firstly, having had the benefit of 2 site visits, I would just like to share with the committee members that gravel has been laid on the track in the last fortnight. Secondly, it's not a straightforward application to a farm track in the countryside. Due consideration should be given to the fact that the access point goes immediately onto a street a sharp bend and pedestrians pass there and there's no pavement. Potentially this access point would endanger traffic negotiating the sharp bend and pedestrian safety. It just adds to all the activity there. Thirdly, we've already discussed the style, the crossing style, and I was wondering, was permission needed to move it? And if so, was it given? Does it alter the course of the public right of way? Fourthly, the field, where there's a public right of way, has unusual mounds. Are these mounds of significant archaeological interest? This application to me is a conundrum. The access is desirable to the applicant, but the access is to the detriment of all the residents and a potential hazard to the pedestrians on a sharp bend. It's a cause for concern for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. I think there were a couple of questions in there. I think the with regards to the position of the footpath, I think Mr. Wager has already clarified that the current arrangement is actually on the definitive map footpath line. So that that is actually correcting a mistake from the past, if anything. The status quo situation is that that style is in the correct place. With regards to the archaeological features of the field, perhaps Mr. Wager might like to make a comment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Regarding the archaeological features, I've checked our GIS system, our geographical information system, which contains all our constraints layers for planning, and I've also checked the Herefordshire Historic Environment Record, and I can find no record of there being archaeological features in the field, and there's no sort of indication of anything being there. Nevertheless, the proposal is on the edge of the field, and it doesn't protrude a considerable distance into the field, with there already being a permitted track there, and I don't consider there to be any concerns arising from that matter.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Wager. I'll move to Councillor Polly Andrews, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of what I was going to say has been Councillor Rohn has already said, but if I have it right, this is an existing access which, whether or not the gate is moved, can still be used. That is correct, is it not? I see Wager nodding his head, so presumably that is right.
Yes, yes.
Yes, so I mean, it is as a current access, it's not a major highway. I don't know how many vehicles use it or are proposed to use it, but surely it can only be in single figures during the course of a day. I really cannot see any objection to this application, and I'm happy to support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Milne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, actually, my hand was up historically, and what Councillor Foxton was saying, asked about the position of the style and the archaeology. Has more or less covered what I was going to say. I just on archaeology very briefly then. In view of the fact that this is a full road formation, a 350 millimetre road formation with a sub-base and the wearing course and the tarmac on top, a lot more than you obviously would expect for a field access. And there clearly is archaeology there, whether or not it's formally recorded on the historic environment record, and that's something else for us to address in terms of updating the historic environment record. That there is likely to be an archaeological implication, but that's not something that we can deal with, sadly, at the moment. So I will say no more on the subject. But thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Milne. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question I asked about whether we could condition a permeable surface. You can get, if you have tarmac, you can have loose leaf tarmac that lets water through it. Otherwise, compacted stone would do the job as well. I just wonder if that is a possibility to try and reduce any possibility of excess water coming off that particular track. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, thank you. I don't know whether Mr. Wager or Mr. Withers. Mr. Withers put his hand up, so I'll go directly to Mr. Withers.
Perhaps Alistair can step in if I do say anything that's off piste, as it were. But I mean, condition 3 of the recommended of the recommendation refers to a requirement to agree the specification of the vehicular access. So there is an opportunity in that regard, in the context of that submission that would follow, to consider the precise details of the surface. Clearly, there may be some tension between the standard of the surface in terms of meeting our highway design guide and the expectation for it to be a wholly porous surface, but certainly that's a matter that could be considered, and obviously alongside that, the detailed matters relating to how the drainage across that vehicular crossing point effectively would be designed, would be a part of that submission too.
Right, thank you, Mr. Withers. Mr. Wager, did you want to add anything, or?
If I could just add one brief point on drainage, is that the proposed plans include a drain to prevent any water running off the track onto the public highway. So as well as the condition referenced by Mr. Withers, there's also drains in place to discharge to the adjoining existing ditch if needed. So they could be seen as being better in drainage terms there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That was my understanding, having read the report, that there is that provision already there with regards to drainage off that track. Councillor Jones, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Just a sort of a couple of questions. I think from a safety point of view, it all looks, I agree with what Councillor Roan has said. But the questions I was just going to ask, because I missed the site visit, is what is the actual farming operation on the farm? It's not anaerobic digestion or whatever. Or no. What is the width of the track? Is it proposed that it's a single track, or is it for overtaking? Is it that 2 vehicles can pass on it?
Right. Is that concluded what you wanted to say, Councillor Jones?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wager?
Thank you, Chair. The width of the track is 3 meters wide, sorry, so it's a single width track. And as regard to the agricultural operations going on, I'm not aware of the details of what the farm undertakes specifically. But all I can comment is that whenever I've visited the field, and I've visited it a number of times now, it's always been put to pasture. So that's all I can really offer in that regard.
Yeah, I think from my understanding, it is a mixed farm enterprise, arable and livestock, and I'm not aware of any anaerobic digestion actually present on the farm. Have we any further speakers, please? If not, then if I can go to Mr. Withers to make any comments before I go back to the local ward member, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm satisfied that the debates covered all the matters that I think are relevant. Clearly, those members that were able to yesterday have visited the site and obviously familiarised themselves with the lie of the land, so to speak. I think I don't really think I've got much more to add than to say over to you for the vote.
Okay, thank you very much. To close the debate then, I should say Councillor Paul Andrews, if you'd like to make any closing comments, please, before we go to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you can call me Mr. Andrews if you want. Thank you all for a great debate. Couple of points. I'd like to sort of say in the end of this, most of the farm is actually let out. Most of the land is let out. So farm vehicles and access, as actually said, the applicant agent states that farm vehicles come and go from the west side proposed entrance will be more efficient. Most of the land is rented out. However, this is no part of the farm holding shown on the submitted plans. But after all I've just heard, if the committee accepts this application and obviously allows it, which obviously I'm against, if we could actually condition that the Lock Road entrance isn't shut off, I'd like that. Obviously, I've heard about the Pernambull Road. If something can be done in future about that it is burnable. I've heard about the drainage. That is great as long as the drainage is maintained, because that's the biggest hassle we have in Herefordshire, as all members know. We put drains in, but drains don't always get maintained. So I wish that can actually make sure that actually happens for the residents of that area that do flood. So that's basically all I've got to say. So if you could actually condition the Lock Road entrance to be kept open and not closed at any point, if we can do that, I'd appreciate it. Also about the Pernambull Road when it comes to the point. But that's it. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Mr. Wager and Mr. Withers, can you clarify with me, please, with regards to the conditions? Condition 3, with regards to the permeable surface, I think that's sort of covered in that one. Then there's the drainage and also the Lock Road additional condition, whether that can be included. Thank you. I don't know who wants to go first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so condition 3, it can be tweaked if members wish to ensure that it is a permeable surface is required as per the condition, if that's what members wish, so it's explicit and precise in the phrasing of the condition in that regard. And then regarding the other farm accesses in the holding, it ultimately is a matter for the decision maker. My advice would be that to question whether it's necessary, given that this is an existing farm access or agricultural access, and it's only to move the gate back. In terms of the development proposed, is it necessary to include such a condition? The applicant has obviously indicated they'd be willing to accept one, but it would come down to a question of necessity, in my opinion. I'll hand over to Mr. Withers.
I think Alistair summed up, Mr. Wages, sorry, has summed up the position very well there. I think the offer of that from the applicant is reassuring from the point of view of the committee attaching a condition if it wishes to. I'm sure we could come up with a form of words that provides the necessary control over that if the committee wishes to move forward with that additional conditional requirement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Withers. That's quite clear, I think. So, Councillor Bowen and Councillor Roan, you proposed and seconded the proposal for adoption of this or acceptance of this application. Would you be happy with the tweaking of the words on condition 3 with regards to permeable surface?
Yes, particularly as I actually asked for it. Yes.
Yes, and also the applicant has offered, to accept a condition with regards to the access points on Lock Road.
Well, let us formalise that, Mr. Chairman, and accept his offer and make it a condition.
Okay, fine. Councillor Roan, you're content with that as well?
Yes, sensible, thank you.
Right, thank you. So we leave it to officers to, and maybe we can, in conjunction with the ward member, come up with a suitable wording of those additional sort of conditions on this application. So if we're all content, then we go to the vote now. If I can have clarification from all members that you've all been present and that you're all in a position to vote. So I go across to Ms. Priest to confirm the numbers of eligible voters for this proposal for approval of this application with the amendments to the conditions as stated.
Chair, we have 13 voting members on this one, and the poll should be in front of them now.
Right, so if members can see that the proposal is for approval of this application, so it's for, against or abstain, please.
All votes are in, Chairman. I have 11 for and 2 against, 0 abstentions.
Okay, thank you. I can confirm then that this application is approved. We're now going to have a 10-minute break before the next application. Mr. Wager is presenting that one as well, so we'll give him an opportunity to prepare for that. So if we can come back at around 6 minutes past 11, that would be. We got Mr. Lively in the waiting room, haven't we, Jen? Yeah. Right, welcome back following our adjournment. Live stream has been confirmed as started. So could I request that the public speaker for agenda item at Dinder is admitted to the meeting, please? Mr. Lively, can you hear us? Not sure if you've got a camera that you can switch on. I think we had a little bit of difficulty last meeting, didn't we? Mr. Lively, can you hear us? Right, I think we might be having problems. So have we got a written statement from Mr. Lively if we can't get him to actually join?
No, Chairman.
We haven't.
No.
Okay, so if in the background, if Jen, if you could try and contact Mr. Lively and see if we can get visual contact and verbal as well, that would be good. Right, the second application this morning is application 201220, land at Hillview, Dinder. Outline permission is sought for the demolition of the existing dwelling and erection of up to 3 residential dwellings with associated drive and access alterations. All other matters reserved. We have 2 Mr. Lively's now. We have 2 speakers for this application. Dinder Parish Council, who have made a written statement that will be read out at the meeting, and we've also got Mr. Lively, who the applicant, who is hopefully going to be with us, but we'll have to confirm that shortly. The ward member for this application is Councillor Summers, and the planning officer that is going to make the presentation this morning is Mr. Wager. So while Jen, well, I'll just see if Mr. Lively can hear me and whether he is able to turn his camera on. You're currently muted, Mr. Lively. Are you able to confirm that you can hear me? Right. If Ms. Priest can continue to try and contact Mr. Lively and see if we can get him live. In the meantime, I'll go to Mr. Wager to make the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. This presentation relates to an outline application for the demolition of an existing dwelling and the erection of up to 3 dwellings with an associated drive. At this juncture, only the matters of access are being considered, with all other matters reserved. As members will be aware from yesterday's site visit, the application site is located at the eastern side of Dindal Village, which itself is approximately 1.2 kilometres from Rotherwas Industrial Estate to the southeast of Hollow Farm Road on a site known as Hillview. Next slide, please. The site is indicated by a red star, as can be seen from the aerial photograph. Bordering the site to the northeast are residential properties in a linear form fronting the highway, with agricultural land adjacent to the northwest and to the rear at the east. Agricultural land currently adjoins the site to the southwest. However, the council has recently granted outline consent for up to 8 dwellings on this land up to Dindal Hall. Equally, the council has previously granted outline consent for 5 dwellings on adjoining land to the northeast at the Oaks, and the council is currently considering as a reserve matters application for this site. The application site lies within the Dindal neighbourhood area. On the 26th of February 2021, the examiner's report for the draft Dindal neighbourhood development plan was received by the council. Accordingly, officers considered the plan to now constitute a post-examination draft neighbourhood development plan, and Section 70 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 includes a statutory duty to have regard to the post-examination draft NDP, though the weight that may be attributed to this plan is a matter for the decision maker. Pertinently for this application, the examiner's report includes a number of recommendations altering the draft neighbourhood development plan. Specifically, there is a recommendation that the extension of the proposed settlement boundary to include residential dwellings to the east side of Dindal, including this site. This includes Hillview, and therefore the site would now be within the settlement boundary where residential development would be supported. As noted in the officer's report, the examiner's report is a material planning consideration for this application. However, at this juncture, amendments have not yet formally been approved in the decision document issued by the council, and so officers considered the draft NDP to continue to carry moderate weight in decision making. Next slide, please. The site is currently comprised of a detached chalet bungalow that is vacant and garden curtilage, which will be demolished as part of this scheme. The pictures show the existing bungalow looking southeast from the access in the top photograph. Middle right picture is grounds looking towards the east, and the bottom photograph shows the bungalow from the eastern boundary looking southwest. Next slide, please. The existing block plan shows the context of the bungalow set back from the line of the existing development, with the majority of grounds to the front of the property. In addition, there is a detached garage and a number of outbuildings on the site that will also be removed as part of this application. Access to the site is via the existing access driveway in the northeast corner of the site. Next slide, please. From the amended indicative site layout plan submitted with the application, it is proposed that the 3 detached dwellings would occupy the site in a linear format, fronting the roadside to maintain the existing character and pattern of development of this part of the settlement, with sufficient parking for each dwelling in front of the properties and a fairly substantial south-facing rear gardens. The matters of layout, scale and appearance and landscaping are reserved at this stage and are to be determined at a later date. However, there is ample opportunity if a reserve matters application were to be made, to provide tree planting and boundary hedgerows to ensure the site maintains its rural character given the setting. The original plans were for 4 dwellings. It is considered that the reduction in the dwelling numbers has enabled a better spatial use of the site, which has improved containment and minimised the impact on both the street scene and the landscape character of the area. There is no conservation area designation within Dindal, but there are a number of designated heritage assets and undesignated heritage assets within the locality. The Grade 2 listed Church of St Andrew and the Grade 2 listed Gelb farmhouse and Grade 2 listed roadside barn of worthy note as designated heritage assets. The land to the south of the church is also the site of a former medieval village, which is a scheduled ancient monument. All 4 heritage assets are situated within 300 metres to the southwest of the proposed site, and the character and the pattern of the settlement forms part of their setting. The historic buildings officer has concerns over the original layout and its impact upon the street scene. However, following the amended indicative layout and reduction in the numbers, he has stated that the architectural and material character would be considered appropriate in this context and a good balance between residential and agricultural scale and form, and thus he considers the proposed development will not harm the setting of heritage assets. In regards to drainage matters, drainage of foul water is proposed to be disposed of via private package treatment plants for each dwelling, with the outfall utilising a shared managed soakaway field. Surface water will be managed through on-site soakaway infiltration systems. These methods align with the aims of the core strategy policies SD3 and SD4. By way of a verbal update to members and consistent with the officer recommendation, an additional condition is recommended to ensure the detailed foul and surface water drainage management schemes are supplied alongside the submission of the reserve matters application, which should include percolation testing, sustainable drainage solutions, and the full technical details for these solutions. This would ensure timely supply of drainage details, as I say, at the reserve matter stage, and consistency with the adjoining outline approval on the site to the southwest. Some concerns were raised regards the original plans from local residents the development not considered to be in keeping with the existing linear development. However, following amended plans, no further letters of objection have been received from local residents. Next slide, please. Access to the site is via the existing access driveway in the northeast corner of the site. The site will be able to provide sufficient visibility space, parking and turning area, and there are no objections from the highways engineer in relation to the access. Next slide, please. The junction of the B4399 and unclassified U72009, some 420 metres from the site, has been raised as a concern from the parish council. And although it is acknowledged that the visibility display is restricted at this junction on the public highway, there are no officially recorded accidents at the junction, and the junction has not been included in the county-wide accident cluster list. Therefore, it is not considered that this application would cause significant additional traffic that would amount to a severe impact level on the highway, and this view is supported by no objection consultation response from the area engineer team leader for highways. Next slide, please. As previously stated, the land to the southwest was recently received planning approval for up to 8 dwellings across 2 sites that sits between this site and Dindal Hall. The photograph shows the adjacent site looking from the garden of Hillview towards the southwest. Next slide, please. These applications P193329 and 193328 were both in outline form. However, the indicative layout plans demonstrated that the pattern of development would be linear to follow the character of the area. As can be seen in this copy of the indicative plans for 193329, the proposed layout of the site would align with these approvals and also follow the existing development line for existing properties to the east. It should be noted that the outline permission for 5 dwellings has been approved on the adjoining site to the northeast, P174700, with the current reserve matters application on the site. Again, the site layout on this site, which adjoins the application site, has a linear form of development. This proposal for the Hillview site will sit adjacent to the 2 approvals to either side, with the existing residential properties further beyond to the east, and this would not be considered to be a freestanding site in the countryside. The recommended alterations to the draft post-examination draft neighbourhood development plan by the examiner result in the site being within the forthcoming settlement boundary for the NDP, and in the absence of the NDP having statutory weight, the proposal accords in the absence of the NDP being formally made as part of the development plan, the proposal does accord with the policy RA2 of the core strategy. To conclude, the development plan carries a statutory presumption in its favour, and the proposal is considered to accord with the policies of the development plan. Whilst the framework is a significant material consideration, the proposal accords with its provisions and also accords with the expectations of the post-examination draft neighbourhood development plan, with there being no material considerations to outweigh these matters, and so officers recommend the application for approval accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wager. Very clear presentation. Thank you very much for that. We have two speakers this morning with regards to this application. Firstly, Dindor Parish Council. They've made a written statement, which I will ask Mr. Brown to read out to us first. Thank you.
Dindor Parish Council welcomes the opportunity to reiterate comments we have made regarding development at this location within Dindor Village. Specifically, we would wish to highlight this application is separate from but adjacent to 3 other applications for multiple dwellings on existing single dwelling sites along Hollow Farm Road, which is the main access road into the village. The total new dwellings on this, if granted, and adjacent sites would amount to some 16 dwellings on a single track road with little in the way of passing spaces and would, in our opinion, result in overdevelopment within the area. The proposed development is on a very narrow single track road leading from the B4399 Home Lacey Road into the village. Visibility on exiting the village at the B4399 is poor, and the increased traffic generated by this and nearby developments will exacerbate an existing issue with the junction that should be addressed before any further development within the village is permitted. Similarly, there is a very sharp bend on the single track access road between the junction with the B4399 and the proposed development. We feel strongly that the additional traffic generated by the proposed developments represents an unacceptable increase, leading to greatly reduced safety for vehicle and pedestrian traffic. We would wish to highlight that there is no public transport accessing the village site, and Dindor has little in the way of facilities. Residents have no option but to travel outside the village for shops, medical services, schools, and most social activities. We have one village hall. We would expect the total of the proposed developments to increase the number of vehicles using this road by at least 35 vehicles, with the potential for upwards of 200 plus vehicle movements per day. Drainage along the road is extremely poor and the road floods when it rains. There is considerable damage to the road surface as a result of recent flooding. The road is considered not fit for purpose. We are concerned that runoff water from the proposed developments will increase the amount of water entering the road, increasing the potential for flooding. We are further concerned that the intensity of the combined developments will create difficulty in providing suitable soakways for the sites themselves, exacerbating the existing problems. The village has no mains drainage or sewerage system. The proposed development will need an adequate system to deal with sewerage and surface drainage for each of the dwellings, with adequate provision for soakways within the property. Currently, drainage issues result in septic tank backups when the road floods, leading to sewerage flooding at the lowest point of the village hall. These issues must be resolved before any further development is permitted. The village consists of single dwellings in a linear form along the roadways, generally within large plots. Whilst we welcome the reduction of the proposed number of houses on the site, the proposed development is not in keeping with the overall design and visual amenity of the village, and is not in keeping with our neighbourhood development plan, which has now passed the independent external examination stage and awaits referendum. The development is outside of the development area within our neighbourhood development plan. The application is contrary to the views expressed during extensive consultation with residents under the neighbourhood plan process. And that concludes, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Now, hopefully, we have Mr. Lively with us this morning. So, can you confirm, Mr. Lively? Can you hear me? And equally, can we hear you? Can you speak to us, please? Unfortunately, we can't hear you currently. Any help, Ms. Rees?
I thought I could hear a little bit of volume then from Mr. Lively, movement.
Right.
Chairman, what I'd suggest is we can provide Mr. Lively with a telephone number to dial into the meeting rather attend as an attendee.
Right.
If I do that in the background, I don't know if you want to adjourn for a minute or two.
Okay. Well, we'll give you 2 minutes to try and arrange that, and Ms. Rees, and we'll just quietly adjourn for 2 minutes while we try and get Mr. Lively live on the meeting. Thank you.
Are you happy for me to just pause the live stream?
If it's necessary to do that, yes, that'll be fine.
Can I just check with legal if that's okay to just pause for?
I think that was.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Sorry,
Lovely. We're back live. So apologies for that delay. We had some technical issues, but we've now got Mr. Lively available on the telephone. And in your own time, Mr. Lively, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry about all this. I've had an email from Chris Moore from Plainview, which is the architects, and he's got 2 things to highlight. The first one is the neighbourhood plan has just been initial response from the inspector examining. He advises that the parish drew the settlement boundary too tight and that it should be extended to include new developments, including mine. As development within the settlement boundaries should be supported in principle. I'm reading this is not my words. The second one is the council raised highway flooding issues along the road. However, drainage management of the road is a county council matter, not a matter relating to this development. Furthermore, as the scheme is outlined, drainage is considered reserved until a reserved matter application should be considered now. I've got a drawing of it. Obviously, it's not with you now, but that's what I've been sent. I don't know if you were aware of this, and that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Lively. We are aware of drainage issues that will actually come with reserve matters applications. So we fully understand that this is an outline application and it's for access to be decided and the principle of development as such. So thank you very much for your input. If I can ask you to leave the meeting now, you have the opportunity to watch it on the YouTube channel, but I'd like to wish you a good day. Thank you, Mr. Lively.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Right, I now move across to Ward Councillor Summers, who is the ward member for this application. And as such, he is not a member of this committee and doesn't get a vote on this application, but has the right to open and close the debate. So in your own time, Councillor Summers, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the councillors that attended the site visit yesterday. I really appreciated it. And thank you, Alistair, for addressing the percolation tests and bringing it up this morning. Thank you very much for that. It was a concern, as you know. As you've heard from the Parish Council and myself, the Parish Council and myself are concerned with this application and others on this narrow strip of road, which is already not fit for purpose. Now, as the officer did raise the matter of the other applications, and I'm not raising it, Chair. I should mention that I've refused to support all applications to date in this area, so this is no different from those. The proposed development will increase traffic along a very narrow single track road with a blind access onto the B4399, which is in itself is extremely a busy road into Rotherwas in the city. Now, you've heard all this before, so I'll make this quite quick. The road provides the main access into and out of the village, and concerns have been registered by the Parish Council and residents on many occasions about the constant flooding and the overall state of the road. In my opinion, this is not about meeting housing targets. This is about public safety on a single track road with very few passing points, where the constant flooding makes it difficult to see where the road ends and the ditch begins. But most of all, it is about the well-being of residents. Dinder Hill is an old Roman encampment serviced by an old Roman road that was built for marching soldiers, not scores of motorized vehicles. I have been told that a road does not constitute a material planning consideration. However, when it involves a narrow strip of badly maintained roads such as this, I have to disagree. Perhaps had the infrastructure problems been addressed in past years rather than showing and allowing it to become the burden it is today, new developments would have been welcomed instead of feared. The facts are drainage is poor when it rains, the road floods. Over the years, there have been many attempts to sort out the drainage problems, often at the expense of the parish council, who have a very small precept and just spent almost 50% of it trying to fix the problems. With approximately 60 new homes, the impact on local traffic will increase substantially onto a blind intersection in the B439. There are no local amenities, including no transport links, so we have no bus going through. My concerns are for those residents who are affected daily by the poor state of this road, which can only be made worse by building more homes. I feel I must support the parish council's concerns about this application and the previous ones, at least until the road becomes safe for all residents. In my opinion, all the planning applications will depend on this road for access, need to be put on hold until all stakeholders come together to sort out a solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Summers. I have 4 speakers registered, starting with Councillor Bowen, followed by Councillor Selden, Stone and Polly Andrews. Councillor Bowen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all have great sympathy with Councillor Summers, who told us very passionately about his concerns about both the roads and the drainage. And I think we take on board his feelings, but whether they are material and whether they are solvable is a different matter. I think as far as the road goes, that is a major problem, and that is perhaps something for the highways people to look at, if they can improve the road itself and improve passing places or provide passing places, not beyond the wit of man or woman to do that. As far as the drainage goes, of course, the landowners and Balfour Beatty, our highways people, are responsible for that, I do believe. So that should be very much borne in mind, I think. And I can see that we could see that the ditches were not cared for, and I'm sure there was some blockage in various culverts and such, which Balfour Beatty should be held to account to clear. As far as the neighbourhood plan goes, it seems to make it very clear that this is going to be part of the neighbourhood plan, and it will be very difficult to refuse it. I think at any, shall we say, dispute on this, and it went to the inspectorate would come down very strongly and say, well, yes, it's there, it should be allowed. And I find it quite difficult to refuse it. And it does continue the linear form of the village, which is quite right. And I think that if we have suitable designs, and that is not apparent at the moment, but I'm sure we can once again ask our officers to demand the very best of design and make sure perhaps we can have some appropriate tree planting there as well to keep the rustic feeling of the area. And I think that would mitigate some of the problems and harm. The access, yes, is as we've said before, is a problem, but I think we seem to have this demand for houses. We have the extended neighbourhood plan, and therefore I have to say I must be supporting this application. And I would, in fact, propose approval of this. And I do tip my hat to Councillor Summers and apologize to him for, I do take your point very strongly, and I understand entirely, but I think we are constrained by circumstances to go towards approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. That is a proposal for approval of this application. Do I have a seconder, please? Polly Andrews, thank you. So I move to Councillor Selden, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is an outline application, so we must be careful on how we deal with it and not stray into areas of design and the minutiae of what a full application would be. However, what concerns me more than anything else about this application is the cumulative effect of this and all the other applications along that road. And it would seem to me that approving this at this time, when there's no indication of how the issues with the drainage that we all witnessed yesterday can be dealt with, it bothers me greatly, because we could end up with a situation where we've approved perhaps up to 20 dwellings along in the linear format, which will probably look quite well if we get the design and accesses right. But then the drainage becomes an issue because of the lack of maintenance, obviously, along that road. And I'm just wondering, I'll ask Mr. Withers or Alistair, Mr. Wager, where do we sit with assessing cumulative impacts of developments such as this? Is it at this stage we can assess it, or will it be at a reserve matters stage whereby we can delve into the minutiae of how surface water drainage works across the entire area, or is there a policy we can use to do that? And I'm drawn back to the National Planning Policy Framework's words about preserving and enhancing an area. And if we're in the business of just having to approve applications here without taking into consideration the cumulative impact, I would struggle with it. So some advice on that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Councillor Selden. So Mr. Wager or Mr. Withers, if you'd like to address that.
Perhaps if I have a go first, and Alistair can fill in the gaps. I mean, the simple answer to Councillor Selden's question is now is the moment at which you consider the cumulative effects of development, whether that be in relation to drainage, highway infrastructure. So at the outline stage, that is the point at which you would consider the principles and the impacts of the development. My sort of follow-up point on that is that clearly one or the decision maker has to be aware of the fact that this is the third, effectively fourth application relating to recent development along this stretch of Hollow Road. And the cumulative impacts of a further 2 dwellings in effect, because don't forget we are replacing a dwelling here, would need to be considered against, and we'd have to have tangible evidence of a further cumulative impact when assessed against the up to 13, I believe, other dwellings that have been proposed and approved either side of this site. So that is something that needs great care and attention if that is a concern that is leading towards reservations about the suitability of this application.
Mr. Wager, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't have anything to add. I think Mr. Withers has covered everything succinctly.
Okay, fine, thank you. I think it's reasonable to take into account the fact that both this application and the 8 dwellings on the one side of this development need to consider suitable drainage plans, etc., and submit those to the satisfaction of the department. So I think that officers are very mindful of the cumulative effect of the development in this area, and so those hurdles need to be jumped. So I move to Councillor Stone next, please, followed by Councillor Polly Andrews.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got mixed views about this application and agree with a lot of what Councillor Selden said a few moments ago. I think it's important to listen to the views of the parish council and local residents, and also to take notice of the views of the local member, who was very passionate about the lack of infrastructure, and I tend to agree with him. I think that there's understandable concern about the access onto the Home Lacey Road, the extra traffic that may be generated by 16 new properties if they're all agreed and approved, because that could mean, as I think the parish council said, over 30 cars, I know something possibly could be done about the junction. It's not an accident cluster site, but it only takes one accident, as we all know. It's obviously a very busy road. So I think that needs to be looked at in due course. Also, the fact there's no public transport, of course, all that could change in a few years if these new bus proposals come in, but who knows? We've heard all this before. But there's also concern, as already been said, about drainage. That has been discussed, but particularly about the lack of sewerage in the village. And that could be really serious in the future if nothing is done. Councillor Summers mentioned about the road flooding. Of course, we were there on yesterday, which was an unusually dry day compared with what we've had recently. But you can imagine the floodwater running down the road, and something clearly needs to be done to address that. So there are all these issues that can be discussed at a later stage, but I do take the point that the emerging neighbourhood plan does show or does indicate that this site would be within the settlement boundary, and these two new and the replacement property could be a very attractive development along the lane if the design is sympathetic. So, as I say, I got mixed views about the application, but I do take Councillor Summers's point. Infrastructure is poor, but that's the case in many villages across the county, including in my area. And it does beg the question, shouldn't we be putting more into the infrastructure before we agree to all these proposals to build more houses? I leave that question in the air, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Polly Andrews, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It was a very interesting site visit, and I thank Councillor Summers for insisting that we had it. I could understand his problems, but I would have to say he made much of the narrow road. Well, we have a lot of narrow roads in Herefordshire, and this one was not as bad as the one we saw later on yesterday morning. Much has also been made of the flooding. Well, as we walked along, I noticed that the ditches needed clearing. Could I perhaps suggest that the parish council raises its precept slightly and pays for a lengthsman to clear the ditches, which might ameliorate the flooding problems that so worry the ward councillor? I really don't feel that we can object to this application, so I won't say any more. I'll just say I will support it.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I believe that the parish council are proactive on the drainage issues within the village. So I believe that they are actually funding some works through the precept as it stands. Councillor Milne, followed by Councillor Shaw, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I share the concerns expressed by many members of the cumulative impact of this development. I recognise that the Historic Buildings Officer felt that, although I recognise we're dealing with an outline plan and that that it is indicative, the layout is indicative only, that he felt that the linear arrangement was appropriate for the street scene. Those are his words. I mean, I think we need to be careful here because this is a settlement in common with most in Herefordshire of dispersed nature with a very small nucleated form that is in danger if we accept the inspector's recommendation to extend the settlement boundary of turning it into urban development. I mean, it does become a point at which it essentially becomes a suburban in character and ceases to become a lane, does become a street, and it's not our job, I think, as a committee to determine, to give evidence as to the point at which that cumulative impact becomes unacceptable or not. Obviously, we have to make a judgment here. But given that the applications for those 5 houses at the Oaks and 8 to the southwest have already been approved, the cumulative impact would undoubtedly be that of a ribbon form. So that was my first point. My second point is around the existing dwelling, which, if the approval goes through, would be demolished, to ensure to ask whether the officer would be minded to put in a condition whereby those materials are, under the environmental management plan, conditioned to remain on site, so that that we do not mishandle the waste. Obviously, if materials are carted in and off site, that has impacts upon the carbon footprint of the development as a whole. But if they can be reused on site, I don't know, maybe crushed up and used as hardcore under driveways and things, God knows, that would help me. Perhaps, Chair, if the officer could comment on whether that might be possible.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Milne. As we appreciate, this is an outline application, so there are matters to be discussed at a later date. But if Mr. Wager would like to pass comment, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just refer members to condition 7 of the officer report, which includes a condition for a construction site waste management plan, which includes a number of provisions, including appropriate measures in accordance with the waste hierarchy. So obviously reusing on site would be the preference. So that's conditioned recommended as a condition, and also construction environmental management plans also recommended as a condition. So that would be controlling vehicle movements to and from the site and delivery times and hours to ensure that any construction movements have as minimal impact on the local surroundings as possible.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Wager. Mr. Withers, did you need to add anything at this juncture? No. I move to Councillor Shaw, followed by Councillor Wilding, Councillor Fagan, and then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I was unable to attend the site meeting yesterday because of other council business, and my apologies to the local ward member and objectors for that, and to the committee. But a couple of points. I think the parish council, I noted, talked about overdevelopment. I think, and that really relates to density of housing, which I don't think is an issue here, not the numbers in themselves. There's a question in terms of the cumulative effect on the ability of the junction to carry that amount of traffic, but I don't see any indication that the junction is at overcapacity at this point in time. I would be happier if some infrastructure works could be incorporated in the proposal. And it's a question really for the planning officers, whether or not the application at this stage, whether a condition could be included to provide a passing place at the front of the development, and that passing place be provided with adequate road drainage, perhaps through provision of a French.
I think Councillor Shaw is frozen. Not sure whether he'd finished, but
gardens, a statement.
Right.
Sorry,
I'm afraid we lost.
Can you hear me?
Lost you for a short while, Councillor Shaw. So if you'd like to repeat,
I'll turn my video off, and hopefully the bandwidth will carry me. Yes. So I was asking whether the application could have a condition to provide a passing place at the front of the development with an appropriate land drain to drain the road, perhaps into or beyond the front gardens of the development. That I think would improve the infrastructure, and I would be much happier with this development with that in place.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shaw. I don't know whether that question can be responded to currently, Mr. Wager, Mr. Withers.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the highways engineer hasn't raised any concerns with the proposal, and the application is only for the net increase of 2 dwellings. And whilst I note the concerns around the cumulative impact in the area, one must consider the application as presented, and that is only a small scale application. And my view would be that it wouldn't be reasonable nor necessary in this instance to provide a passing place in this location. And I hand over to Mr. Withers to make any further comments.
Thank you, Mr. Wager.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, it's a feature really of what's happened, that we've had a series of small scale residential developments that, you know, had they come in as a single combined scheme, we may well be, you know, in a position to have been seeking, you know, contributions and other improvements, but the legislation and policies prevent that. I mean, I think to come back to Councillor Shaw's point, I don't feel it's reasonable to attach a condition, you know, in those very specific terms, but I don't see that there's any reason why we can't, you know, through some sort of informative note, you know, make it clear that the developer or any subsequent owner of the site could, through the design of their layout of the development at the reserve matters stage, could seek to try and incorporate some form of informal, for the want of a better word, passing area, a bit leaving a little bit of undeveloped space in front of the site to incorporate that. But I think that would be the extent of what I could recommend to the committee in the context of this application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Withers. Councillor Wilding, followed by Councillor Fagan, Johnson and Roan.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I got called away and missed most of the presentation, so I won't be able to vote on this one. But I still wanted to just say a couple of things. I also share the concerns about the accumulative effect of the houses, so that's one thing. But obviously, again, I do realise this is outline. So my main thing is, while I have the ear of the developer stroke applicant, can I just ask that they pay due attention to the orientation of the buildings when they come to actually plan them on the site? Because all the construction environmental plans you make will be useless unless the orientation of the buildings is really put in place during the planning stage. So that's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilding. Councillor Fagan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the site visit due to council business either, and I apologise for that. But I share the concerns that the local community have about the impact of additional transport on the roads and the cumulative impact of this housing development. I mean, I think that for me, it flags up a few things. The fact that the community infrastructure levy, we do not have one. And this is a problem sort of throughout Herefordshire. It seems that we have small developments like this that sort of grow and grow and grow till you've got suddenly however many, I think somebody said 16 new houses, but there's nothing being contributed towards the infrastructure through these tiny developments. I believe the infrastructure levy was put on hold in 2018. So we've got this issue with all these tiny developments that are not contributing towards the infrastructure, not contributing towards the sort of additional impact on schools. And I think it's a major issue. I do note also from the Dundalk Parish Council minutes that they didn't increase their precept, and that this is a way that parish councils can actually try and influence the infrastructure in their local area and through the parish precept. But I also note that Danador's only 2.5 miles outside of Herefordshire, so it is quite well positioned to be able to provide active travel opportunities. And again, this flags up for me the need of us to have car clubs within our rural communities, because what are we going to do about all of the additional traffic that all of these houses are going to bring to Herefordshire? So I just wanted to make those points while I had the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will support this application, but reluctantly. I think it's appropriate just to raise the point again, the Chairman, not for action today, but for consideration. I'm aware of the dictum that we're only allowed to, or we must only consider the plan in front of us. But to my simple mind, what that amounts to is keeping score, not planning. The officers, both officers have said that, drawn our attention to the fact that it's simply another 2 houses and therefore various conditions might not be appropriate. But what I put it to everybody in this committee is that if a builder came along and said, I want to build 40 houses along that road altogether, we would then be looking at passing places, local facilities, transport, all sorts of things. But if we do it 2 extra houses at a time, we don't look at any of these things. Now that frankly does seem quite ridiculous to me. And I believe that it's time that we started taking a look at the cumulative effect of these things as a committee, whoever may form that committee. At the moment, I accept the officers' opinions. They are constrained, as are we. But it does seem to me very odd that if it was one huge construction, all matters would be considered, but do it a little bit at a time and nobody gets to say anything about it. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think the officer did actually make a comment that it's at this stage that the cumulative effect should be considered by the members.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Roan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors Milne and Johnson speak complete and utter sense. I feel every time I listen to Councillor Milne speak, I am enhancing my ability to think about things. He is without doubt the jewel of this planning committee, and we should all learn from him. And if, as Councillor Johnson said, we need somebody to stop, look, listen, and think about how we take such developments that Councillor Johnson just described onwards, I think Councillor Milne would be the ideal one to take it on. However, we're dealing with this application today in front of us, and regardless of what we've heard about flooding and such, there are no good reasons to turn this down. Stood there yesterday, I was thinking what a beautiful place Herefordshire is. Who on earth wouldn't want to live there? I do think maybe 3 on that plot is a bit too much, but that's what we're dealing with. It's up to 3 new dwellings. I will be supporting the application today, and I will be going with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Roan. I've got no further members indicating that they wish to speak, so I'll close the debate at that point. Invite officers to make any closing comments before I go back to the ward councillor. Mr. Withers, please.
No, thank you, Chairman. Again, similar to the last item, councillors who were able to attend have obviously understood the site and its context. We've obviously set out the emerging local neighbourhood development plan position for members. I would and hope that there's enough assurance within the recommendation that matters relating to drainage will be very carefully considered as a conditional requirement of any future application. And I've heard the concerns about the highway safety implications. You'll also obviously have read that the area engineer has not at this point in time reached the conclusion that there would be any severe implications associated with the highway capacity or the capacity of junctions in the locality. So I think all of those points have been very well considered, and I'll therefore hand back to you, Chairman.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Withers. Councillor Summers, thank you.
Well, thank you for a really great debate, and I'm really happy with it. And it's everything that I wanted has come out of it, to be frank. I hope you'll bear with me. I just basically two statements, not so much about this particular planning, but I'll read them out to you because I woke up during the night thinking of these. Our rural roads are the arteries that keep the heart of a nation pumping, and we've allowed them to fall into ruin. I think most councillors here today will recognize that fact, especially in rural areas. If you're in the country, you're in trouble because the roads are absolutely disgraceful. I drove them yesterday. And my other thing is, what really concerns me here, and it concerns all parish councils, is the proposed development on the outside of the developed area and identified within the draft of the neighbourhood plan as agreed during the extensive consultation with residents. I'm not sure how many readings this has gone through, but I would suggest that the finished product will not conform to what the residents want, but while someone sitting behind a desk has decided is what is good for the village. And I'm seeing this more and more. I'm not sure what other ward councillors find this in their parishes, but this business of neighbourhood developments is being skewed to fit with other people's ideas, not of the parish it belongs to. So I am really concerned, and I would beg all my fellow colleagues that we really need to look at these neighbourhood developments and do something about it. Many thanks for your input and your time. Thank you.
Right, thank you for those comments. With regards to the neighbourhood development plans, they are led by the parishioners, and obviously have to go through independent inspection, etc. But at the referendum, the villagers will choose whether to accept it or not. So it will be their choice. Right, we've already been made aware that Councillor Wilding was called away to a call and wasn't able to hear all the presentation. So we're aware that he is unable to vote on this application. Are there any other members that need to advise me that they're not in a position to vote? So that's a no. So we have a proposal on the table that has been proposed by Councillor Bowen, seconded by Councillor Polly Andrews, that this application, land at Hillview Dinder, is approved as recommended. Can Ms. Priest advise me on the numbers eligible to vote and whether the system is ready?
Yes, Chairman, the voting number is 12 and you may vote now.
Okay, thank you. So proposal is for approval of this application as per the recommendation. For, against, or abstain, and press the blue submit button, please.
Chair, all the votes are in. I have 8 for, 3 against, and 1 abstention.
Okay, thank you. So that application is approved, as Ms. Priest said, by 8 votes for, 3 against, and 1 abstention. It's my intention now that we call another 10-minute break. So if I can ask that the live stream is stopped and ask that everybody is always a bit of a delay. Right, live stream is recommenced, so welcome back to all. Can I request that the public speaker for agenda item 8, attending as a virtual attendee, Mrs. Churchill, is admitted into the meeting room, please. Right, welcome, Ms. Churchill. Could you just confirm that you can see and hear us, please? You're currently muted. If you can unmute yourself, just so that we can test that we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can. Slightly quiet, but we can hear you. So
I'll pull you forward. Hang on. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you very much, Mrs. Churchill. Yes, welcome to the meeting. We'll call upon you to speak in due course following the presentation of the application. This application before us today is number 191409, Tower Lodge, 15 Linton Lane, Bromyard. The proposed redevelopment of Tower Lodge, 15 Linton Lane, Bromyard, to include alterations to the existing dwelling together with construction of 2 new dwellings. The officer making the presentation today is Mr. Josh Bailey, and the ward councillor for this application is Mr. Councillor Nigel Shaw. He is acting as a member of this committee today, but for this application, he now stands aside in his position as ward councillor and therefore will not get a vote, but is entitled to open and close the debate. So without further ado, if I can invite Mr. Bailey to make presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and a very good afternoon to all members and interested parties. Just before beginning the presentation, members' attention is drawn to the publicised schedule of updates, namely the receipt of 4 further representations by local interested parties, as well as the officer's response to these. As confirmed on the site visit yesterday, officers just wish to highlight that there remains an outstanding objection in respect of the impact on the River Wye Special Area of Conservation, namely in relation to phosphates, which is discussed in the officer report and also later in this presentation. The applicant respects this position and has requested the application still be determined as submitted, and hence the officer recommendation for refusal with a single reason. In terms of the development plan, the application is to be considered in accordance with the Council's core strategy, and the MPPF is a significant material consideration. The Bromyard and Winslow NDP was at drafting stage, although a formal request has been made to withdraw the neighbourhood area. In that regard, I'll turn to the presentation, in which the site, as denoted by the red star on screen, comprises a single detached dwelling with garden area to the southeast of Bromyard Town Centre, approximately a 5-minute walk away. Topography of site slopes east, and boundary treatments comprise a mixture of trees and hedgerow to all sides. The application seeks full plan permission for alterations to 15 Linton Lane, along with the erection of 2 detached dwellings and associated development. And the next slide, please. In terms of surrounding development, a caravan park lies to the south, with residential properties to the east and west. To the other side, on the A44 to the north, namely Bromyard Bypass, there is a petrol station with retail provision, a currently closed car dealership, and further residential dwellings. Vehicular access is taken off an existing cul-de-sac of Linton Lane that currently serves 3 other dwellings in addition to the application site, as members saw on their site visit yesterday. On the block map above, and as we also walked yesterday by members, they will note the presence of an existing pedestrian footpath to the northwest of site, which leads directly to the A44, with a bus stop 150 yards from this footpath to the east, where Linton Lane also meets with the A44. And the next slide, please. In which members will see clearly the location plan edged in red, indicating the extent of the application site. And the next slide, please, which shows the proposed block plan, in which to facilitate the proposed development, a new internal access will be established along with parking areas. In addition to alterations to 15 Linton Lane itself, the development will create 1 1.5-storey 3-bedroom dwelling and 1 2-bedroom bungalow with a single-storey detached garage. In the absence of a neighbourhood development plan, it is for officers to assess an application in terms of its relationship to the main built form. In this instance, the site lies north of Linton Lane, in what would be regarded as an established and built-up residential area of Bromyard. Indeed, the existing use of the site is residential. It is within walking distance of the town centre, and officers are of the view that in locational terms, the site is sustainable, and the principle of development in this location is found to be compliant with policy BY1 of the core strategy, which is consistent with the MPPF. And the next slide, please. In which, in terms of alterations to the existing dwelling, which is finished in red brick and concrete tiled roof, the dwelling would be altered to facilitate the new access for the removal of the existing flat roof garage at the north elevation, and will be relocated off at the west elevation, which, if I could have the next slide, please. You'll see that the proposed alterations are now shown on screen to reflect this. And the next slide, please. In which this shows the first proposed new dwelling to be created, with glazing predominantly tried to be focused towards the south elevation and inclusion of architectural detailing, including dormer windows, which are quite common in the locality. In line with core strategy policy SS7, and as detailed in the planning statement and officer's report, the application proposes the incorporation of water saving services to minimise use of water, rainwater pipes to discharge into water butts, the inclusion of solar panels on the roof slope, namely for each dwelling to be provided with a 3 kilowatt PV array facing east-west, and the site layout including potential for passive solar gain with a high proportion of glazing orientated within 30 degrees of south, and inclusion of cycle storage for each dwelling, which officers consider can be secured by condition to be implemented. And the next slide, please, which shows the proposed bungalow also to be finished in red brick and concrete tiled roof to reflect the existing dwelling already on site, in which officers considered the two dwellings will deliver an appropriate development reflecting the well-established need of housing in Bromyard, which identifies a need for single-storey bungalows and smaller three-bedroom dwellings. The development reflects the immediate environment as in view of officers is considered to be acceptable. It's considered the proposal is of an appropriate design in line with core strategy policies SD1 and LD1, which is consistent with section 12 of the NPPF in achieving appropriate design. The new dwellings will introduce development in closer proximity to existing properties. However, officers are of the view that the new and existing dwellings will be adequately spaced from one another, particularly respecting that this forms part of what is considered to be an urban area. Furthermore, officers have received amended plans to omit an originally proposed further dwelling in the front garden of 15 Linton Lane, and the orientation of their dwellings and layout does not give rise to overarching concerns for overshadowing or overbearing that would lead to conflict with the requirements of core strategy policy SD1, which is consistent with paragraphs 127 and 180 of the NPPF. And the next slide, please, which the next few slides are going to give an idea of site characteristics and surrounding locale, as members saw in their site visit yesterday, which I hope was beneficial. Starting top left and going in a clockwise direction, the first photo is taken on the entrance to 15 Linton Lane looking eastwards. The next one then is taken by the existing garage of 15 Linton Lane looking west towards 7, 9 and 11 Linton Lane, noting the considerable elevation changes as one heads west up towards Tower Hill as members experienced on their walk up Linton Lane. The next photo is then taken at the far east of the site looking towards 15 Linton Lane. And then finally in the bottom left, we're looking east, and this is taken from the northeast of 15 Linton Lane, predominantly where we stood in the garden area. And the next slide, please, which are some more photos beginning immediately at the top left, which is taken from the south of 15 Linton Lane, looking east again towards the far end of the site. The middle right photo is taken towards the eastern end of site, again looking east, so members can also appreciate to consider the amenity on adjoining properties. And again, in considering amenity, the photograph in the bottom left is taken from the east of the site, looking south towards the Linton Caravan Park. It's not considered that the proposal departs from the character of the area in which brick walling and concrete tile roof are featured materials and dwellings hereabouts, and the development as a whole reflects the character of its immediate environs. Development will read particularly from long distances on the approach to the town as part of a well-established built form that would not look distinctively out of place and reading as part of a built-up townscape. The landscape and townscape impact is therefore considered to be minimal, and the proposal is considered to conserve local character and the character of the area in line with policy LD1 of the core strategy, which is consistent with section 15 of the NPPF. And the next slide, please, in which members will see the two photos on screen are taken from the entrance to the cul-de-sac, which they entered and left site yesterday, giving an idea of visibility onto Linton Lane, looking eastbound and westbound respectively. And the next slide, please, in which the top photograph is taken from the opposite side of the road to give an idea of the current entrance to the site as members did see, and the bottom two photos were taken along Linton Lane to appreciate the current road infrastructure, which of course members both walked and drove the length of yesterday to give a current idea of where the site conditions currently looked, and to give a reference point in the bottom right photo, the application site can be picked out by the presence of the salt bin. The existing access arrangements are to remain unaltered, in which vehicles will access site from the unclassified public highway, which has appropriate visibility and is mitigated by road geometry, therefore reducing vehicle speeds. As members will note in the officer's report, as confirmed by the area engineer, there are no highway objections to this proposal, with parking and turning areas suitable, and they have no objections to the intensification of this access or concerns raised over the surrounding network, including Linton Lane itself. A condition requiring details of parking for site operatives and construction traffic prior to development commencing is recommended. And in the view of officers, there are considered to be no highway issues, and the proposal accords with policies MT1 and SS4 of the core strategy, which is consistent with section 9 of the NPPF and not contravening paragraph 109. And the next slide, please, which identifies the extent of the Bromyard conservation area and identified nearest heritage assets with a relationship to the application site, which is in the table below. Based on evidence before officers, including site history and observations, there is adequate separation distances between the application site and those identified heritage assets, largely as a result of built-up intervisibility. Although the site is elevated when viewed from the approach to the Bromyard when travelling west, it is relatively well screened, although it is appreciated that existing vegetation will of course be non-existent at certain months of the year. The density of development is also not uncharacteristic for the town. Although there will be glimpses of the proposed new dwellings, the development in the view of officers would not result in harm to the character and appearance or of the setting, experience and significance of these identified designated heritage assets, and in the absence of any identified harm, no conflict is identified with core strategy policy LD4, which is consistent with section 16 of the MPPF. And the next slide, please. Which is taken just where we meet with Sherford Street with the A44, and we're looking directly towards the application site, in which members will note there are no objections from an ecological or drainage perspective from the relevant technical consultees. However, as identified in paragraph 6.20 to 6.30 inclusive, this application would create potential for additional phosphate flows into the main sewer network and creating a direct pathway into the River Wye special area of conservation. The proposal cannot currently demonstrate that the proposed development would lead to reduced foul water flows compared to those actually occurring and contributing to the failure of the SAC in July 2019. These pathways are identified as having a potential unmitigated adverse effect on the integrity of the River Lug special area of conservation, and thus planning consent should not be granted at this time, and that any grant of planning consent would be contrary to the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017, Core Strategy Policies SD4 and LD2, the MPPF, and of course the Council's duty of care under the NERC Act of 2006. Members will be aware that the Council has been taking a positive and proactive approach with those applications within the Lug catchment where they are the only matter outstanding from determining an application and allowing for further information to be provided. However, as I said in the introduction, the applicant has requested a determination is made on this application as submitted. Accordingly, officers consider the proposal does not benefit from the positive presumption in favour of sustainable development, and the tilted balance in favour of development of paragraph 11(d)(ii) should not apply. This is as the policies of the MPPF provide a clear reason for refusing this proposal in accordance with paragraph 11(d)(i), as the Council can only conclude that the proposal is likely to have a significant effect on the habitat site and is unable to undertake an appropriate assessment to demonstrate the proposal will not adversely affect the integrity of the habitat site, namely the impact on the River Wye special area of conservation. Officers, though, view that the development is acceptable in all other respects apart from this matter. However, planning permission cannot be granted at this time, and thus the application is recommended for refusal for the sole reason as outlined at the end of the officer report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. We now move across to our speakers this morning, today, I should say. We have three speakers. We've got Mrs. Churchill, who is actually present with us, who is going to start. So, Mrs. Churchill, on behalf of Bromyard and Winslow Town Council, you have 3 minutes in your own time. Thank you. You need to unmute yourself first.
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
All right, right. Thank you for inviting me to speak to this meeting, or allowing me to speak to this meeting. We on the council have discussed this application, and we have come up with the 4 following reasons for we think should be refused. We think or believe that is an overdevelopment of the site. If we have unreasonable development within this site because of habitats, phosphates, and everything else to go with it. We think that there is an adequate highway, both width and in non-conformity to modern standards, resulting in increased endangerment to public health and safety. As your officers and some of your councillors realise, it's a very narrow roadway and the cars are very large around this area. Most people drive Land Rovers, Discoveries, you name it, they're that large. And we also think there's poor landscape and a negative environment impact. In addition, we have received a recent planning inspectorate appeal decision, AWP/W18500/W19/3222582 for Red Lynch Old Road, as this we think creates a precedent of this type of development. And that's what I have to say, really. We don't think that it should be approved for those reasons, plus ones that your officers have made.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Churchill. Now move across to Mr. Darwood, who is a local resident and objector, and he's made a written statement, which Mr. Brown will read out to us now. Thank you.
Speaking on behalf of the local residents, I would like to address this committee with the following reasons for rejection of the above proposal. We assume that you have absorbed the 50+ objection letters and 30+ petition, as well as the recent summary. This application has been unanimously rejected twice by the Bromyard Planning Committee, who have a good knowledge of the area. A similar proposal, 181415, was rejected by Bromyard and Hereford Planning, as well as the appeal decision on the grounds of overdevelopment, inadequate highway due to non-conformity to modern standards, and the increased safety risk to users of the access road. This has set up a legal precedent to confirm rejection to this proposal, as the concerns are almost identical. More clarification is needed over some comments on the original proposal, as original bulk factor and size of the building land were overstated and only reduced after our initial concerns. All land around Linton Lane is Hereford clay, yet this site is reported as a sandy nature, and thus, if incorrect, has severe drainage issues. The privacy issue of the developer's photographs and comments re trees have been largely directed towards the A44 and not the invasive views over Linton Park. Has there been proper environmental and conservation reports as opposed to talks? This is not a brownfield site as originally claimed, but a residential garden of the existing house. Linton Lane is now fully developed with no vacant plots for building. Already some brick deliveries were unable to access Linton Lane and had to be manually moved up the footpath from the A44. As there is no parking space on all of Linton Lane, will there be sufficient parking for visitors and service deliveries over and above the residential parking in the proposed development? The desirability of converging the driveways of the 3 buildings at number 15, together with the existing 3 driveways and public footpath in a small space, is an additional access concern. Many reports in the proposal refer to extensive talks and thus appear not to be official regulations and are, in our opinion, questionable. Arising from these issues, there are serious concerns over the adequacy of the advice offered by the County Council's Highways Officer to the above proposal as compared to the legal opinion on proposal 181415, which had far superior access. There are serious vibration risks to grade 2 properties and the existing congestion issues around the hospital entrance affecting the adequacy of Tower Hill access. Who will finance the cost of future road and wall repairs if extra properties are built with no one owner being directly responsible? Hereford Council? The impact on residents and the existing ambience of the area have been totally ignored, as well as the health and safety of residents compromised. To quote from one objection, why should one person have such a negative impact on so many lives? To conclude, and for safety reasons, for the users of Linton Lane, we trust that this proposal, which is not needed and not wanted, will be rejected. And that concludes, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Brown. We have one further submission from Mr. Brooks, the applicant, who's made a written statement. And if I could ask Mr. Brown to also read that out, please. Thank you.
The application before you is for the redevelopment of the site known as 15 Linton Lane, Bromyard. As you will have seen from your site visit today, the site is well placed in terms of sustainability, being in walking distance to all the amenities of Bromyard Town Centre, as well as being on a main bus route to the larger towns of Hereford, Leominster and Worcester. Clearly, therefore, we believe the site has good links and from purely a location point of view is in a sustainable position. The proposal is for 3 dwellings, but only 2 of these are new dwellings, namely a 2-bed bungalow and a 3-bed cottage style dwelling. The other dwelling is an existing property which will be altered to accommodate the proposed redevelopment. As stated, the 2 new properties are both single storey and 1.5 storey, and as you will have seen today, the site is fairly enclosed with high evergreen hedges which would afford very limited overlooking. I say that very little, as clearly there would be a small amount. However, this should be taken in context and the fact that this is an urban area. As can be seen from the planning officer's report, the largest number of objections relates to width and condition of the highways, and I'd like to address this issue. Firstly, I would again ask that members remember that one house already exists on the site and the net gain is only 2 relatively small units, meaning the increase in traffic is relatively minor. The development of the site shows all the necessary parking required and there would therefore be no increase in on-street parking. The visibility from the proposed development is also satisfactory and any vehicles entering or leaving the site can do so in a forward gear, and for these reasons the application is supported by the Highways Officer. With regards to the condition of the highway, we'd like to point out that this appears to be in fair condition and is in no way worse than many roads in the county. The increase in traffic will certainly not add greatly immediately to the wear of the road, and neither will the construction traffic to what is a relatively minor development. We also believe neighbours' concerns about overdevelopment and impact on the character of the area are also misfounded. Members can see from the site plan and from their visit that the existing property sits in a very large garden, which in actual fact is out of keeping. We believe the introduction of 2 further dwellings will not be out of keeping and will certainly not be an overdevelopment to the site. In terms of density levels, it is still well below the guideline of 30 dwellings per hectare that many local authorities have adopted. In terms of impact on the character of the area, we again believe there will be little impact as there is development all around. There is no particular design criteria to follow, and the listed buildings referred to are not in close proximity so as the development could affect their setting. Indeed, there are other new build properties, including the community hospital, which are much closer. It should also be noted there is no objection from the listed buildings and conservation officer on this issue. In terms of noise and disturbance, as with all developments, there would be some increased noise and possibly disturbance for the duration of the works. However, the council can set a condition limiting working hours. In conclusion, we believe that your officers quite rightfully recommended for approval and come out in support of the scheme. The site is within the development boundary for the town and in a location which is sustainable. The development, although small, provides a mix of housing which specifically complies to the needs of the local area, namely a single-storey dwelling and a small 3-bed dwelling. Our belief is that the development makes a more effective use of the land and the balance falls in favour of this development. Finally, as we believe that the proposal complies with the MPPF, there should be a presumption in favour of planning, and we therefore hope the committee will support the application. And that concludes, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Quite a lot to get through, but well done, kept within the 3 minutes. So I now would like to request that Mrs. Churchill leave the meeting. I'd like to remind her that you're able to watch the recording on the YouTube of the council. And thank you very much for your input today, and wish you good day. Thank you, Mrs. Churchill. Right, we now go into Ward Councillor Shaw, who is given the opportunity to open the debate. So in your own time, Councillor Shaw, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Mr. Bailey for your report. I appreciate and concur with you about the necessity to reject this application on the grounds of the phosphate issues raised. However, I originally requested that this application came before committee for 2 reasons. The first was the unprecedented amount of local concern, evidenced by the volume of 56 representations and the petition. And the second was the planning questions that arose from those concerns, which I believe provide further reason for objection, which may remain once the current phosphate issue is resolved. To allow this application to be refused only on the grounds of the phosphate issue would make it very difficult for the authority to refuse an identical future application with the new reasons once the phosphate problem is resolved. Consequently, I'm in the strange position of asking the committee to agree with the reasons for refusal given by the officer, but to consider further reasons for refusal to be noted in the decision. Can I thank those committee members who travelled to Bromyard yesterday to view the site and see for yourselves the topography and the access as it affects the development. The first planning question is the approach to the site via Linton Lane because of its width and absence of footway. In some places at 3 metres, it does not conform to the Hereford design standard for development. Hardly surprising, as it dates from before the 16th century and has been little changed since then. Highways have not objected to the use of this lane to access the development, although they have chosen to object elsewhere in Bromyard to wider roads because they don't meet the design standard at a different development in Firs Orchard. There, the inspector upheld the highways view on appeal of the inadequacy of the highway's access width at 4 metres in regards to highway safety and the free flow of traffic. Without a highways recommendation that the application is unsuitable because of highways grounds, I appreciate that it is very difficult for this committee to reject the site under policy MT1. I do, however, have a particular concern about any building related deliveries during construction works. In similar circumstances elsewhere, conditions have been made that materials should only be brought to site in small vehicles, utilising an off-site compound for larger deliveries. There could be a refusal that because typical construction traffic is unsuitable for Linton Lane on the grounds of highway safety and the free flow of traffic, and thus contrary to MT1, that an onus be put on the developer to formulate a different approach to any future application. The MPPF clause 110D also requires a development to allow for the efficient delivery of goods and access by services and emergency vehicles. You may wish to question whether this application adequately addresses that point, or whether an appropriate construction management plan is required for this development. The second planning question relates to the elevated aspect of the site and the existing garden where the development is planned, and the site's overlooking of other residential properties at Linton Residential Caravan Park and listed buildings on Linton Lane. Although the caravan park itself is relatively densely developed, the properties on the north side of Linton Lane, set on a steep slope, retain a wider ambiance with established trees and shrubs. The development is close to the boundary of the Bromyard Conservation Area, which extends over the bypass to include the 3 Grade 2 listed buildings, Bridge House, number 24 Linton Lane, and the barn adjoining, which you may have seen at the beginning of Linton Lane. The question which you may wish to address is therefore whether development so affects the character and appearance of the area, with particular regard to the development pattern and layout of the surrounding area, and also the overbearing impact on the amenity of the overlooked dwellings, specifically numbers 45, 46, 47, 59, and 60 Linton Lane. Do these impacts both or individually outweigh the development benefit? To that end, the committee may wish to consider the MPPF clause 127A and C, namely, that planning decisions should ensure that developments A, will function well and add to the overall quality of the area, and B, are sympathetic to the local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting. If committee members are not convinced that both points are adequately addressed by the application, then they could refuse the application on these grounds. In addition, then, BY1 can be cited, as this requires developments to contribute to the quality of Bromyard's local environment, including its landscape and historical character. And in addition, policy LD1, which refers to the maintenance and extension of tree cover where important to amenity, through the retention of important trees, appropriate replacement of trees lost through development, and new planting to support green infrastructure. If it wasn't for COVID restrictions, you would have benefited during the site visit from the well-behaved presence of some 50 concerned local residents who were persuaded not to protest about this backyard development in person. Just to recap, paragraph 110D and MT1 for the reason that the application does not consider deliveries, particularly through the development phase, and paragraphs 127A and D, BY1 and LD1 for the reasons that the development is not sympathetic to the local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting, nor that it will function well and add to the overall quality of the area. I look forward to your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. So we have one member who's registered to open a debate. So it looks like he's going for a hat trick. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, hat trick. And this time I'm not going for approval, but for disapproval, refusal, in fact. And Councillor Shaw has given us some very good reasons, and I think we should take them very deeply to heart. Well, for a start, the access is absolutely appalling. It's a lovely little lane. Fine if you were a medieval peasant dragging your little cart behind you, but not more than that. And I thought that the chairman's posh new vehicle might get stuck in it, in fact, and he just scraped through. And if you had a person standing in that lane trying not to be run down, it would be almost impossible to avoid them. It is just awful. I mean, and the top half of the lane is slightly better, but not a great lot. It is unbelievably extraordinary that the highways didn't object to this, I think. We go on to the plot itself as well. It's an extraordinarily crammed design. In fact, the houses are within spitting distance of each other in all practical purposes. It's another example also of the gardens of town houses or houses near a town being turned into building sites and housing developments, really exemplifying greed before need. And also the impact on neighbors is considerable, or potentially very considerable, I think. And really, I think we should throw this out as soon as we can. And obviously the phosphate problem gives us a straightaway refusal, but I think these other matters should also be in the mixture as well. And we've had the various items from the planning documents that give us reasons for refusing this. And I highly recommend that we use those reasons for refusal. It is appalling access. It is difficult to think of carrying equipment and bricks and all the other stuff up there, or coming down to it with any great safety or convenience to your neighbors in any way at all. It is, I believe, not within, shall we say, it is not going to improve the ambiance or the character of Bromyard either. And in every way, I think we should say no. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. So that's a proposal for refusal.
It is indeed.
And you will obviously need to mention the other points for refusal that you mentioned before we actually go to a vote. Or could I request whether we've got a seconder for that proposal to start with? Is anybody prepared to second it at this stage? Councillor Selden. Okay, thank you. We now move on to Councillor Rowan, followed by Councillor Selden. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I always like to be in the shadow of Councillor Bowen when it comes to speaking. I think we've just heard from Councillor Shaw what is a very in-depth and professional layout of the reasons why additional refusal reasons for this application. I'm going to describe this as backland development. I see that if you're going to have to change how a house looks and then have a driveway going right way past it, to me, it looks like an attempt to shoehorn something in there that doesn't belong in there. I understand entirely that it's close to the city centre and amenities within walking distance, and it's on bus routes and all the things it should do. But good gracious, this does now set a precedence for the slightly oversized garden, stick in planning, that sets a precedence. I don't see it at all for all the reasons highlighted by Councillor Shaw and then just promoted by Councillor Bowen. So I will be going with officer recommendation, obviously, for the reasons stated in his report, but also for the reasons highlighted by the local member. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowan. Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that Councillor Shaw quite rightly highlighted is the inconsistency within our highways reports. And I think it's something that we really do have to get a grip of, because those of you who came to see Linton Lane yesterday have first-hand experience of how difficult and narrow that lane is. You may have also noticed on the way up the lane a section of a retaining wall that had collapsed into the lane. So I suspect that in the next couple of months we'll be closing Linton Lane to be able to rebuild that wall at some point. So that gives an indication as to how that seems to work. We are shortly going to be considering another proposal in Bromyard for a major development, whereby the same issues over the legal definition of what is necessary for modern highway requirements is going to be very, very tight. And I think that Councillor Shaw's made a really good point on this application of we can't reasonably interpret the national policy framework as to this being a modern highway access. There is no way that this conforms. So I shall be voting away on wanting to refuse this, but will include those issues on highways where we don't agree with our highways experts, I'm afraid. And I would suspect that we might well be open to a judicial review if we did on that. Looking at the photographs there, it just doesn't make sense that that's not being taken into consideration at all. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Selden. Councillor Polly Andrews, please.
Sorry, excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. It just proves how useful site visits are. I wonder if I could just, could I thank Councillor Shaw for a very complete presentation, but could I just ask, part of the application was for a bungalow. Now, I noticed on site that the site dipped very considerably, went downhill, and the bungalow was on the lower aspect. If all that soil has to be removed to create a level access for the bungalow, how would that affect the stability of the bank that leads up from the pavement and the A44?
Right, so that's a question, is it?
It's a question, yes. I mean, there are times when I would say, Chairman, when you look at planning applications and think this cannot be real, and this is one of them.
Okay, so would Mr. Bailey like to respond to that question, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe, as I understand, that land instability is not normally a material planning consideration, unfortunately. But as I think we did discuss yesterday on site, thanks to Councillor Selden, as to why the lie of the land was the way it was to do with the bypass overspill in that regard. I would say perhaps also, Chairman, just to bring your attention, I think as you would have heard from the Town Council and Councillor Shaw in his comments regarding an appeal decision in the other half of the town, just to make that clear, that was for the demolition of a bungalow and for 4 bungalows in its place, rather than for the additional 2 dwellings that you are considering with this application. In that particular appeal decision, the Council's Highways Authority did object to that application, and that was why it did form a reason for refusal in that regard, although there isn't one on this particular application.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Bailey. Councillor Milne, your hand's been taken down. Do you still wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I did take my hand down because I didn't want to repeat broadly what I was going to say has been covered by speakers before me. Just one or two residual things I'd like clarification on. The site is off Frog Lane, which until the bypass was put through had a public connection through to the town. I should have asked this yesterday at the site meeting. It's clearly de facto severed from the town by virtue of the bypass. I did try and cross there and took my life in my hands, but is it still technically a right of way, a Fog Lane? I ask this because as we discovered yesterday, as we were struggling up and down Back Lane, as it was historically known, Linton Lane as it is now, that it is quite heavily trafficked because for whatever reason, no matter how sustainable the site may be claimed to be by the applicant, sadly, most people around there do seem to motor around in very large cars, as we heard earlier, much to the hazard of pedestrians. So if Fog Lane were a safe, sustainable route directly into the town, I might view this rather differently. It isn't by reason of its severance, but is it legally still a right of way? Can I just have an answer to that?
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
I saw Councillor Shaw shaking his head, which would make me think I would defer to him on that comment. I'm not aware myself, unfortunately, as to whether that is a as a
Right. Well, I'll ask Councillor Shaw if he wants to make a comment. Then.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Where the Frog Lane still exists on the opposite side of the road, it does lead up into the town, and it is still a vehicular a roadway. However, any right of way that Frog Lane had where it now crosses the highway, the new bypass, I'm assuming it was extinguished by virtue of the fact that a new highway has been constructed effectively 20 feet underneath the original passageway of Frog Lane. So there's no vehicular access there. There is an underpass, which the councillor may not have found, which is up at Pump Street.
Right. So that's relevant, the fact that there is an underpass, but the fact that anybody can cross any highway on any point also needs to be taken into account, really, whether the old public right-of-way that used to cross where the bypass is now still exists or not. So that would be my take on it. Has that sufficiently answered your question, Councillor Mill?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. I've got no further speakers registered at the moment. Is there anybody else that actually wishes to speak? If not, then I go to officers, Mr. Withers primarily, as to whether he's got any comments before I go back to the local member.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So picking up on the points that were quite clearly expressed in Councillor Shaw's opening address, and I think judging by my assessment of the debate, have been largely accepted by certainly by those members who've spoken in the following debate. We have a number of, we have one very clearly settled reason for refusal. Let's make that clear, and we have, I think, potentially 2 additional grounds for refusal, if I've understood the debate. Excuse me, I may have to mute myself. The dog may just start barking profusely in a minute. No, it's all right. My wife's just got home. That'll be all right. Sorry. So yes, getting back on track. There are concerns about, if you like, the overdevelopment, cramped form of development, in terms of, you know, just the scale of housing on the site, not assisted by its elevated position. We have, forgive me, those members who have visited the site will have a better understanding of the relationship with the caravan park than I do, but that issue of overbearing was also in mind, I think, in those concerns. And then we have concerns about highway safety, largely associated with the narrow, constrained nature of Linton Lane and access to and from the site via that. What I wasn't clear on, and perhaps could be clarified in the next stage of consideration, is whether or not that impact is associated with concerns about construction traffic and sort of future larger scale delivery vehicles accessing the site, or if it is also in relation to, you know, the general movement of private cars associated with future occupiers of the development. I sense there was a distinction being made at times, and I would like to understand that, particularly in the context of my concerns about going down a route of refusing planning permission on highway safety grounds in the face of a no objection from our technical consultee. I don't have the same reservations in relation to the judgments that have been sort of set out in relation to the more subjective points of character and adverse impact on the character of the location and neighbouring properties. Okay, but we have some some grounds and policy grounds that have been quite clearly set out.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Withers. Before I go to Councillor Shaw, I see Councillor Selden has got his hand raised, and obviously Councillor Selden has got a great deal of local knowledge, so I will allow him to come in at this juncture.
Thank you,
make any
Chairman.
further comment.
My comment would be on the highways issues is how do we make the lane and the access comply with modern requirements? And I think it's 3 metre width for a single track, and I don't think there's any point in Linton Lane that's 3 metres wide until you get down towards the A44. And I say, as you know, I do sometimes worry about the inconsistencies within our highways reports that sometimes allow come up with no objections to accesses like this, and then on other points do object to it. So I have some concerns about that. How we address it, I leave to Mr. Bailey and Mr. Withers to come up with some ideas on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether you want to make any further comment following that, Mr. Withers.
I suppose, well, I guess it's unfortunate we don't have the area engineer with us today to try and clarify that point. I mean, I don't want to go over old ground, but clearly, you know, every site has to be assessed on its individual merits. We've heard that this is, you know, a development involving effectively a net gain of 2 dwellings along, admittedly, a very narrow lane, which obviously attracts its own sort of level of traffic at the moment. So I think I just need to be clear that in terms of any grounds for refusal, that if in effect what the committee is sort of concluding, that any intensification of use, whether it be construction traffic, you know, future delivery based traffic, or even, you know, the traffic associated with car movements from the 2 additional dwellings, if that is what's leading to the suggestion that there is a severe highway impact, then I just think we need to be clear that it is all of those or a smaller, you know, as I've said, whether it's the construction concerns or the large delivery vehicle concerns.
Okay, I think that point's been made clear. So Councillor Bowen and Councillor Selden, you need to give very sound reasons, obviously, before we go to the vote. So I'll just allow you time to consider that while Councillor Shaw closes the debate. So I'll hand over to Councillor Shaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your consideration of this application and my opening remarks. The Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and so paragraph 11 of the framework is engaged. In these circumstances, the framework seeks that permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole, or where specific policies in the framework indicate that development should be restricted. In terms of benefits, the framework encourages the development of small sites and making efficient use of urban land, and with this site having good accessibility to Bromyard and public transport. The proposal provides an additional 2 dwellings above the existing scenario, and the economic benefits which come from the construction of those dwellings and the local expenditure from proposed occupants. That said, the development of 2 dwellings, along with associate benefits, in my view, would make only a modest contribution towards the housing shortfall locally, and so the benefits of the proposal carry very limited weight. Looking at what the inspector said in terms of the appeal site that he rejected, he said that the scheme would be contrary to policy SS4 of the local plan, which seeks that development should be designed to minimize impacts to the transport network. Policy MT1 of the local plan, which amongst other number of other criteria, seeks that development be designed without adversely affecting the safe and efficient flow of traffic. And paragraphs 108 and 109 of the framework that seek that safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved for all users, and seeks that the development is resisted where there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, which I think is the case in this instance, or that the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. It follows that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and so the proposal would not represent sustainable development. For those reasons, and taking all other matters into consideration, I request that the committee refuse the application on all the grounds presented by the officer and myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shaw. Before we go to the vote, I'll go back to Councillor Bowen and Councillor Selden just to advise us as to the additional conditions that, or reasons, I should say, for refusal based on their proposal and seconding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had a very valuable and fluent comments by Councillor Shaw, who's given us plenty of reasons for refusing this in every way, including the tiny lane, which is totally inadequate for any form of modern traffic. And though it is technically a two-way street, apparently, how that will ever work, God knows. It is, I believe, inadequate both for any construction traffic and for any intensification for deliveries or for just general purpose personal traffic. It is totally unacceptable, I believe. We should not be adding to the problems there already. And we've had the various items, MT1, SS4, 1110D, paragraph 108, 109, BY1, LG1, all these, and I'm sure that Councillor Shaw's, I think he sent out a note just now, are all on there. We could use all those as very good reasons for refusing this, let alone the overriding reason of the phosphates. But these should remain as part of our reasons for refusal, so that in the future, they will have weight and will be, I'm sure, very important to make sure we don't, sorry, there's so many shores here, aren't there? Make absolutely certain that we do not allow this overdevelopment and this crammed site to be allowed to progress.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Selden, are you content with those comments?
I am, thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. And Mr. Withers, are you content with the clarity of those further reasons?
I think, yeah, I've got a clear understanding of effectively the two additional reasons for refusal that have been debated. So yes, I'm content that we have those clearly articulated. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And legal, you're comfortable as well?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right. Now, it was indicated to me that Councillor Fagan dropped out for a short while. Do you feel that sort of you're unable to vote because of that, or did you hear the majority of the debate and the presentation?
Well, actually, I did hear the majority of the debate and the presentations. I dropped out during the ward councillor's final presentation and just came back in at the end of that. So if
okay,
that's enough, then I can vote.
Right, and I would concur that Councillor Shaw's sort of summing up was repeating what his opening statements were really. So I would concur with you that that sort of entitles you to vote. Okay, so if I can go to Ms. Priest to ask if the system is up and going and that confirm the number of eligible members to vote, that this application is for refusal as per the recommendation from Mr. Bailey, with the additional refusal elements of the decision as stated by Councillor Bowen and Councillor Selden.
Yes, Chair, we are ready. I've got 12 voting members and they may vote now.
Thank you. So that's for refusal, against refusal, or abstain. can all make your vote and press the blue submit button. Thank you.
Chair votes are in, and members have voted unanimously for refusal.
So that's 12 members voted for refusal, so that's unanimous. So that application has been refused. That concludes the business for today. It just leaves me to thank you all for your attendance, and definitely for the attendance at planning site visits yesterday, which were most worthwhile. And to advise you that the date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 7th of April. So can I formally close the meeting and ask that the live stream be stopped?